Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
I know you're probably a little sad that the Orioles, didn't make it very far this year, but you got to be feeling the Mets fever. You have to. How else? What else could you be doing with yourself besides uh, getting excited about playoff baseball in Queens?
Yeah, there's no guarantee, right? They had to battle just to make it into the playoffs, I think, right? It came down to the wire, and now they're doing great. Also, the looks like the Yankees are up, I think, 2-1 on the Royals, and the Dodgers are up on the Padres and the Tigers, I think, right? So we're narrowing it down. My son is thrown in with the Dodgers, so
Oh, really?
that's my team
Is,
for the
is,
rest.
is,
Yeah, he's a Otani
oh,
fan.
okay, but has he abandoned the Orioles, or is this just for this year because the Orioles are out?
No, this is just, yeah, O's are out. And plus, if you're gonna like adopt a team to root for the playoffs, it's 3,000 miles away and the National League. So, I'm okay with it. It's as long as I told him, like, as long as you don't root for the Yankees or the Cowboys, I'm okay.
So, Matt Lewis,
What are we going to talk about today?
um, I want to ask you. So Kamala Harris is wrapping up this big media blitz where she did Colbert, Howard Stern, The View, all the Smoke podcasts, Call Her Daddy podcast, and I watch it and I say to myself, she's doing great. Seems like a regular person, very confident, on message. One misstep was when she didn't answer the question, what would you do for them than Biden, right away. I think in the annals of like candidate gas, it's pretty low on the list. This isn't basket of deplorables. This isn't you ain't black. This isn't clinging to, guns and religion level gaff. Um, and I just feel like, to the extent that people think, she can't handle unscripted events, she can't do interviews. I'm like, she's just abusing that. She seems just like a regular person having a conversation. And I see lots of other commentary from her haters, so particularly on, in Trump-friendly social media, she's pathetic, she's an idiot. This is 60 Minutes was a disaster. I mentioned 60 Minutes. She did 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes was a disaster. As someone who we've discussed is someone who, Matt Lewis, not a Democrat, but not a Trump supporter, has often been very willing to criticize Democrats whenever he seems appropriate, when he deems appropriate. This seems like kind of a Rorschach test kind of thing, how you view these interviews. Like, what was your gut response to these interviews?
So my gut response is, having watched very little of them. So I'm coming at this from I'm coming at this from a different standpoint than you, and that's good, I think, for our viewers, because you can be too close. So I'm not really watching these interviews often in their entirety. I'm just seeing what is being said about them.
Mm-hmm. Have you
And
seen
of
clips?
course, that's self-selecting and all of that. But my sense is that there is a momentum that Harris's momentum has sort of stalled. You know, um, Obviously, back in July with her selection, there was all of this excitement and momentum, and the convention and selection of Tim Walz. And it really feels now like it's just a grind these next, 30, I don't even know how many days, less
Less
than a
than 30
month,
now.
right? I think there was a lot of pressure on Kamala to do interviews. People were saying she's not doing enough interviews. So she started doing interviews. And I think in a way that made her a target, right? So, like, for example, it allows Trump and his, minions to take a snippet of an interview she did where she didn't have her best moment and mock that. So look, here's the thing. I'm sure that there are millions of particularly women who listen or watch Call Her Daddy. I'm not that target audience. So it may be highly effective for her target audience, but I'm just giving you my perspective.
Mm.
It feels like she's lost the momentum. That's sort of my macro trend right now.
Well, I said one. I think of all of these interviews, I think you should take the time and watch the Howard Stern interview, which they just put up in full yesterday. I just think you'd find it, an interesting interview to watch, maybe you probably are less interested in watching, Alex Cooper on Call Her Daddy talk a lot, abortion for a long stretch, whereas Howard Stern is talking more on a wider range of issues. And it's just more of a conversation about her story, which I just think you might find interesting, or anybody for that matter. If you're looking for I don't really know Kamala Harris.
I do remember when Hillary did Howard Stern after she lost the election,
right?
Thinking, why didn't she do this earlier? Because not only was Howard is a very good interviewer, but I think we saw a side of Hillary that if people had seen maybe before the election, she would have done better.
And I don't think Howard asked his best questions as far as in the annals of Howard interviews. Probably he's not doing his best work because he says up front, I want you to win. I don't want you. He expresses dismay that she's made fun of on Saturday Night Live because she doesn't want anything bad to happen to her. So he's not trying to pin her down or anything. But I still think they had a good conversation.
Now this is where I disagree, because I have been watching SNL, and I think Dana Carvey and Jim Gaffigan, and I think that the depiction of Kamala has been good.
Oh, I agree. I think Howard was being overly sensitive.
That's what they do.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. The other point I want to say about your observation about momentum, I mean, it's hard to expect anything else. You weren't going to just go, coast on vibes for a 3-month stretch. It's amazing she carried it for as long as she did. It's going to become a grind at any point in a race. Now, if the polls show that she was up by 5 in every swing state, maybe you wouldn't say that. You would say that she is coasting. But that was probably an unrealistic expectation. And I am struck by the Nate Cohn argument. I don't know if you read that article recently, that the trend in most polling has been to weight past vote recall. How did you vote in 2020? And then try to weigh your numbers so the electorate is matching what it was in 2020, which in Cohn's argument, this could be artificially moving the dials in a way where you're going to miss a shift in sentiment. And he's saying the New York Times polling is not doing that, but a lot of other ones are. And so the most recent New York Times poll had Kamala up by 4 nationally and losing Florida. But they did an oversample in Florida and Texas, and she was losing Florida by 13, which is way more than other polls are showing. And he was arguing this actually makes sense. This makes sense that Kamala is doing the difference in national versus battleground state is relatively narrow because Trump's getting a lot of wasted votes in places like Florida or even New York, where you might be doing better with, say, New York Latinos, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And there's one thing I just want to add to that.
And Kamala is doing, go on. And I think Kamala is doing better with white vote, right? So that
particularly white college educated.
Mitigate mitigate the disparity that would, because if you look at the especially Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, Hispanics, I'm guessing, are underrepresented in those 3 states, and so it's not helping Trump. We could actually have a smaller gap between the Electoral College and the popular vote.
Right. And I am hesitant to run too far with the African-American and Latino subsamples in a lot of these Sunbelt polls and Pennsylvania polls. It's literally a smaller number of people, and so you have wider margins of error. I haven't gone through and looked at it completely exhaustively, but what little spot checking I did in terms of national polling and the black vote in 2020, Biden did better on election day than in some of the polling, although the polling now is even more favorable to Trump in that regard. So but we'll see how it actually shakes out on election day. And I'm also, this is not something that Nate Cohn has argued or any other pollster or poll analyst of repute has argued. So I'm speaking just as a knee-jerk, layman here, there appears to be a big trend in pollsters using party affiliation as a to weigh, which I know 10 years ago was more controversial. Because again, party affiliation is not the same as gender or race. Like these are, essentially immutable characteristics. Transgender issues aside, you know, we don't have wide changes in the number of women and men that go to the polls or blacks and Latinos that go to the polls. Those numbers are relatively stable, but people change their politics. People do swing, and so the number of Democrats, the number of Republicans, the number of independents in a particular election, and not just people might swing, but some people might not show up. Maybe you have a big Democratic turnout one year, a big Republican turnout one year. But apparently this has become less controversial to use that as a weighing point. And I wonder if that's wise or not. So I know in the New York Times polls, for example, and in the Times national polls in Kamala's favor at this point, but they've seemed pretty consistent. They're saying that the Democrat and Republican shares of the electorate are going to be the same. What if they're not? So the race might look very tight right now, might look like a grind, but maybe there's going to be a turnout boost or a late swing one way or the other, and the polls aren't captured either because it hasn't happened yet, because that's how it happens late in the game, or the way they're filling with the dials is making it artificially close. These are the unknowns, I think, that are compromising our ability to assess the race.
We don't know. We have no idea what's going to happen, or very little idea.
But do you think, she told Kamala having a momentum problem, do you think she's done something wrong? She's made a mistake in some way, or just it's close because it's close and she's doing the best she can and there's not much else she can do about it. She just has to try to gut out a close race.
I think it's mostly that. I think it's mostly close. She hasn't made any major errors, which is key. But I don't think she's played perfect baseball. I mean, you mentioned that was such a tough, that question, how are you different than Joe Biden, right? I mean, if she says, it's almost a no-win answer.
I posted on X soon after that, because it was live on The View. I said, she has an available answer to this question. I'm going to put a Republican in my cabinet. I mean, she's taken that position already.
And that's her, yeah.
And then 20 minutes later, she said that on The View. It's because I posted it on X. I don't know. But she did have that. And it did, I think, mitigate the news cycle to some degree, because at least that was in the story. But it still generated some headlines. And of course, the Trump campaign is using the snippet without the recovery later, in ads now. And he's even showing it at rallies and citing it at rallies. So, a misstep. But that's like the worst miss I think that she's done so far, which I think is pretty minor.
But there's really no great answer to that question, because if it's a substantive answer, then it becomes a big news story, and it's a slight on Biden. It could split the Democratic coalition.
Mm-hmm.
It could create more problems. It becomes a huge headline, and it's like, well, why did you say something back then? You were part of the administration. If you think we should have done something different on the border, why didn't you say something back then? Or, you know what I'm saying? So like, it's a very difficult question. Basically, I think that Kamala hasn't been perfect. She hasn't been able to keep the excitement and energy going. Maybe that was never possible. Mostly, I think the problem is we live in a 50-50 divided country that's also incredibly polarized. And at the end of the day, she was also, an accidental candidate, right? I mean, I think that she has ultimately performed much better than I thought she would, but she came out of the gate so strong. And then I think it's just felt more like treading water for the last few weeks.
I mean, I'm of a mind that, if it is 50-50 nation, you start there, and no matter what you do, it's going to be close. I'm still inclined to give the edge to the candidate who is the more disciplined messenger, who is not making gaffes, who has the money advantage, who has the ground game advantage. That's as much as you could ask a campaign to do to win a close race. I'm not saying there are plenty of people who win without the most money. Donald Trump had less money in 2016, so I'm not trying to say that's guarantees a victory. But if you're trying to win, you're trying to gut a game of inches, I'd rather have more money than not. I'd rather have more door knockers than not. I'd rather be making less mistakes on air than not. Trump maybe gets more media attention, but it's often because he's saying things that are crazy. And the argument
Yeah.
in 2016 was that, well, getting more attention, bad media attention is better than no media attention, so keep doing it. Um, but and if he wins, then that argument will bear out. But it's not the way I would play it if I was a campaign manager.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I should just apologize right now if I'm feeling kind of surly and irascible, and a lot of it I think is uh, it's a depression over. I don't know if it's. I just think politics has maybe gotten even nastier because we're so close now, less than 30 days. Um, but when I look at what has happened to my conservative movement, the Republican Party, and this is, on one hand, like this has been happening for 9, 10 years, so I should be used to it. But it keeps getting worse. Like I think I talked to you about this a few weeks ago, where like literally there were people who stayed friends with me for 8 years of this, and now like I've lost friends just in the last 6 months. Um, and basically, it's because I think that there were people who were kind of mainstream conservatives who like said Trump isn't who we are. They said this in 2016, and they wrote it out, and they took their lumps, and they took the slings and arrows, and then they said, we're going to stay tough. We're not going to go Trumpy. We're going to stay conservative, but we're not going to go Trumpy. And they won in 2020. They thought, okay, Trump's going to go away. Maybe we can get Ron DeSantis or Marco Rubio or somebody in here. And they finally gave up, I think. And so pretty much by now, almost every part of the conservative movement and the Republican Party has finally given in. And I think as the closer you get to an election, the more people are like locked in, and they're and especially ironic, but it's sort of ironic, but especially people who held out for so long, who didn't bow the knee to Trump until recently, they're like even more invested now, I think, in Trump winning.
JD Vance is kind of the epitome of that. Someone who was clearly never Trumper in 2016, and then found a way to say, well, if I'm gonna, I mean, clearly someone. I don't know if you watched. I think it just came out, but PBS Frontline does the Choice specials every year. I don't know if they always do Vice President. Maybe they do, but I don't recall seeing a Vice President one before. But they put up a Vice President installment this week, and I just watched that yesterday. And you may not learn too much new, but you get perspective because they interview lots of sort of friends and colleagues of these people. And Vance and Walls are both kind of new on the scene, so you probably will learn a little something or get a little more color. And I did get a sense from that Vance was always political at Yale. They talked to Yale people, they talked to Ramaswamy and other friends of his who have gone the other way politically, and that he was always kind of interested in politics. So it seems more plausible to me that he saw the book as a way to kickstart a political career, but then the election in 2016 went the other way, and so he found a way to keep his standing in the Republican Party. And I suspect that maybe the people in your circles who maybe held it a little bit longer on the Trump bandwagon are now sort of kind of catch up and saying, hey, if JD Vance could do it, I see myself in him. He's my kind of guy. And he knows where the bread is being buttered here. Look, if we're going to be Republicans, this is what we have to do. And now it's time to,
Yeah. Or like it's not like they're not saying, well, JD Vance sold out and he was a master manipulator. I should do that too. Like that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is like, oh, this is great. JD's he's the future. So let's get on the bandwagon now because JD gives us hope that. And yeah, it's just an incredibly frustrating time for me. And honestly, watching, I don't think I realized it at the time. In the immediate aftermath of the vice presidential debate, we were doing punditry about the debate, and I think our consensus was that Vance certainly won on points, but Waltz might have been more likable. But the longer I've kind of lived with that debate, the more the more it's bothered me, and the more that JD Vance's demeanor and sort of smugness and condescension has really irked me even more, and it's come to really bother me I think I'm dealing with like it's been an identity crisis for a decade now, Bill. I mean,
One
how
little
long
weird,
can how long can we take this?
one little weird thing about the post-debate period. So I just wrote a piece for the Washington Monthly about the media strategies of the two campaigns, because Harris is on Media Blitz. Trump has done a fair amount of media lately. Let's feel like it's all conservative media. Vance has been a relatively quiet in the past few days. I mean, he's done some stuff, but he was the most eager interviewer by exponentially between the four of them, between Harris, Trump, Vance, Walz, uh, between July and September. And it was been relatively dark post debate, which I thought was kind of weird because they were crowing that he crushed the debate. Why wouldn't you want to run with it? But the entirety of the Trump campaign has really retreated to the conservative bubble in the past week, whereas Harris is doing, mostly friendly interviewers, Colbert, Alex Cooper, Howard Stern, but 60 Minutes, and Tim Walz did Fox News Sunday, which is no small thing. So they're trying to hit
Yeah.
check a lot more boxes demographically, ideologically, whereas Trump did the Flagrant podcast, which is a right-leaning comedy podcast. Did Ben Shapiro. He did Laura Ingraham. He did I'm missing one. Other conservative show. I apologize. But yeah,
I do think I watched a little. I think it was the Flagrant podcast, and Trump came across pretty good on that. I mean, I realize it's a friendly environment, but he was challenged a little bit, and you can learn. Like in a way, I feel like letting Trump run and letting him talk is obviously much more revealing, especially in a way if he feels comfortable and safe. He can say things that are much more telling, I think, than if he perceives it as a hostile environment.
Well, I agree with you that he came across relatively well on the Flagrant broadcast. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched some snippets. Oh, Hugh Hewitt's who I missed before. Hugh Hewitt. But Ben Shapiro also let Trump run pretty far. And I forced Matt to pull this clip, which I know is like an absurdly long clip, but I do think it's very revealing. And Shapiro is the first person I'm aware of, and Shapiro's question was generally very fawning, and even this question is pretty fawning, but he's the first one to ask about my favorite topic, which is ground game, and what Trump has done to the ground game strategy. And I just thought Trump's answer here was very revealing. Do you mind trying to pull up some of that?
At 7 swing states right now, all polling within margin of error. Obviously, it's all going to come down to turnout at this point. You're a turnout machine. You get your base out. How confident are you in your campaign's get out the vote efforts? Because we've been hearing a lot of information on the ground, some sort of good, some not as good, about the ability to get votes out. Because Democrats are professionals at ballot harvesting and doing everything else that they can to get those ballots in, however they have to do it.
Well, they're the greatest cheaters, and they do cheat. And we got hit with now 2 hurricanes. And, we were leading Florida by a lot, and I suspect that'll stay that way. We have a big lead in Florida. And in North Carolina, we were leading solidly. I've won it twice, and, it looked like we were going to win it reasonably easily today. It's a little bit of a, purplish state, I think, because you have a governor.
Oh, I forgot to mention on that podcast we were just talking about, he was talking about how he weaves things in.
Yeah.
He'll like go on
the Flagrant podcast. He said this.
He comes back to it. He calls it weaving. So I think he's weaving right here.
You have a senator. You have different things that make it purple. But I had no problem with it. I've always done well. Nobody can really predict what these storms are having. I'd like to say to you, this is, something that, and I hate to say help because people are dying, and they're dying, and that's more important than anything we're talking about, actually. But representation is very important, and representation for the country is so important. We're going so wrong, and people are dying on a national level at all different things, including the border, et cetera, et cetera. But the storms, I can say we have a great team. We have great people. They don't cheat. And the other side does. When they get ready, I was mentioning to a group yesterday, when they're getting ready for a campaign, they start working on cheating. Remember, they spied on my campaign long before I was even assured to be in. I mean, and it's all documented and perfectly documented. But they spied on my campaign. It was one of the first things. It's the first time I heard about, their ways. So we should win. And the other thing is, for whatever reason, I don't know, good, bad, or indifferent, poll numbers haven't been very accurate in me.
And by the way, let me just point out, Bill, he still has not mentioned anything to do with get out the vote or a ground game, but okay.
I mean, he's highly meandering. I mean, I heard people complain about Kamala Harris when she was asked about her economic plan that she spent a minute talking about her middle-class childhood before getting to her policy answers. Here's a guy, he's not even done yet, by the way. His initial response to how's your ground game is
we're not done. We're halfway through.
Right. The Democrats cheat. He brings up the hurricanes, and he's not really clear why he's bringing them up. He seems to be suggesting that it's going to hurt their vote, but he doesn't quite say it. And he talks about North Carolina being purple, and we chopped up that clip a little bit there, but he said, it's a purple state because they have a governor, they have a senator, and different things. That's not why a state is purple. It's not an explanation why a state is purple.
I was given a 3% chance and then won quite easily. When you look at other poll numbers, I've tended to poll very low, and I'm leading in every poll. And I'm leading all of the swing states. And there are those that say, how can anybody take this? The incompetence of what they're doing with the hurricanes, and we have another one coming. And I mean, I think Ron's going to do a very good job and maybe save them, but they're not going to do anything. They're just incompetent. She is grossly incompetent. Biden was incompetent. She is equally incompetent, and in a certain way, she's more incompetent. But so I think that when you see the numbers, you may very well, Ben, see much higher numbers. With a lot of people say it could be because they go out and they see signs. They see Trump signs, but every single house, all over the place, and they're saying, it just doesn't feel like it's that close an election. Now, I don't know, and you always have to assume you're losing by 1 point because that's probably the best way to run. Just run right till the end. I've worked about 28 days in a row. I have about 29 days left, whatever it may be, 29, and I'm not taking any days off. I've just, I just feel I
still haven't gotten to the question, but okay.
I would feel guilty if I took a day off. Okay, I would feel you would also. I know you.
He's not leading every poll.
Go ahead.
You wouldn't base how well you're doing based on the number of lawn signs you see. There's all sorts of stuff here that's nuts, but keep going.
Yeah.
Your work habits are right up there, and you would too. But I do tend to poll much differently than the end result. If you remember the first one, where I was actually polled 17 points down in Wisconsin, and I won it. You remember that? That was ABC Washington.
I do remember
Post,
that.
two real sleazebag organizations. And they had me down 2 days before the election, 17 points. And I had just left. I had 35,000 people at a rally going crazy in Wisconsin. And then I won. And I said to a pollster, how come I said to John McLaughlin, actually, Ben, how come they could do that? Why don't they make it 3 or 4 points? At least they save credibility. And he said, no, 3 or 4 points, people vote. When you're 17 points down, people say, you know what, I like Trump a lot, but we're not going to vote. I said, it's that way. And I never forgot it. I was 17 points down, and I ended up winning Wisconsin 2 days later. And a lot of what you see is false. It's really terrible. The whole system is.
All right, so he never actually mentioned anything to do.
That's the end. That's a 4.5 minute response to the initial ground game question. Now that last part, Matt, he was not down 17 points in Wisconsin in 2016. He was down 17 points in an ABC Washington Post poll in Wisconsin in 2020. And he did lose Wisconsin. I didn't lose by 17 points. And look, people have conflated memories all the time, but here's the guy.
Isn't there some truth to it though? Maybe it wasn't 17 points, but I do happen to. I
the
remember
polling was off in
way
Wisconsin.
back
Yes,
where he was.
The overall polling in Wisconsin was off in 2016. That is true. But he's talking about a specific poll. He says it. ABC Washington Post poll, 17 points. 2 days later, I won. There's only one poll that applies to the last week in October, not quite 2 days. It was a week before in 2020. And he lost by a little bit. It was clearly a botched poll. But it's not just like he had this sort of errant, conflated memory. He has a whole story around it where I talked to my pollster after I won about this particular poll. Why did they do 3 or 4 points and not 17? I never forgot it. I mean, this is all just one example of failed memory, discursive meandering, clearly made up story. But it gets totally under the radar because it's on a podcast. It's not at a rally. There's like 10 other crazy things that he said on this particular day. We're talking about what he said about genes, the genes of murderers on Hugh Hewitt, for example. And of course, there's this natural hurricane going on that's drawing a lot of attention, legitimately so. But I come back to this because everything about this answer is everything that Trump people say is bad about Kamala Harris interviews, when it applies to Trump, 100 times more so.
Bill, I feel like this is the year, I may write about this, that look, we've had a long time of, Nixon, suck it to me. And, and didn't Barack Obama do an interview with some woman who takes a bath in Fruit Loops cereal or some weird thing like that? So we've had influencers, we've had podcasters and all of that. But it feels like this is the tipping point. And I know Kamala's doing The View and 60 Minutes and all that, but it feels like this is the year where YouTube and podcasting, it maybe supplanted the mainstream media in terms of the way that these politicians are getting the message out. What do you think of that?
I mean, supplanted is probably a bit overstating it, but look, I mean, Howard Stern reportedly has 10 million listeners regularly. The Call Her Daddy podcast has 5 million downloads. The View, which is, broadcast television, was more like, 2. And Colbert is like 2.5. 60 Minutes, which is the most watched news show, averages on Sundays 8 million. But that's far more than the average cable TV news show, which is probably more like one or 2. So it's not a social obligation for a candidate to go on CNN or ABC or NBC to do an interview. They want to go where people are going to hear them, and so there's a mathematical pull to do shows that have actual listeners. And I understand that puts a lot of power in the candidate to pick and choose who they talk to. And that's only going to change to some degree if the voters say, hey, I really need you to go on a different kind of show before I make my judgment. Now, look, Kamala Harris is doing that to some extent, more so than Trump. I mean, for Kamala to do 60 Minutes and for Trump to snub it, I understand the argument, well, that's just one interview. Trump's done all these other interviews. When Trump does a mainstream media interview, which is kind of rare, mind you, he still mainly does conservative media. He's on a 24 conservative media consecutive streak. But before he did 6 press conferences to Kamala's 0. So I understand that argument. But what does he do in these press conferences? He attacks the journalists. It's not like he's being put through the 8th degree. He's using them as foils to attack and give fodder to the conservative media echo chamber and use that as grist to gin up his base. I think the media is doing a pretty darn good job with the fact checking, and it's very possible that JD Vance and Trump have made fact checking a slur, misguidedly so. It obviously makes the conservatives happy to see him do that, but I think on a large stage, and this might speak to some of your post-debate consternation, JD Vance scolds the moderators. Hey, you guys said you weren't going to fact check. To the average listener, it's like, what? You're complaining about being fact-checked? That's what journalists do. That's their freaking job. And you're going to say that's somehow against the rules? So that may end up biting them in the ass in the end of the day. Again, voters are the final arbiter here. If they penalize a candidate for not going through anything that involves fact-checking or by berating fact-checkers, then candidates are going to say, well, I guess I got to really subject myself to this. But you're going to see more and more podcast influencer interviews so long as they have larger audiences, because candidates want to go where the audience is.
Well, we invite everyone on to get our dozens of viewers and listeners. Whoever wants to come on, we welcome you. Bill, that seems like a good show. I think we've had our say. You
should do a little hustling. You should reach out to the Kamala Harris campaign for an interview. They want never Trumpers.
Maybe I will. Well, I think the Bulwark probably has a few more listeners, but we're here, and I may, maybe I'll ping someone over there. Bill, anything you want to plug?
I do want to mention an article in Politico by the editor-in-chief of the Washington Monthly, Paul Glastris, about a slice of the voting demographic that doesn't get a lot of attention, the state college voter. These are state colleges. We're not even talking about like the flagships like Michigan. You're talking about places that Tim Walz went to, Chadron State University, Michigan State, NC State, Northern Arizona University, places like that. These are, when we talk about the college educated voter, the vast majority of them are not Ivy Leaguers. Yeah. Vast majority of them are people who go to state universities, or I should say plurality go to state universities. And to the extent that, Democrats don't run up the score 100-0 with these folks, is that some of those people, lean conservative. But Tim Walz is somewhat of all the. Well, I guess JD Vance went to Ohio State. I guess that would qualify. I don't know if they consider the flagship.
Before he went to Yale
law. But but Walz is squarely in that demographic, and I think they deserve more attention. As Paul Glastris argues, there's policies, there's funding that could be steered more to these colleges that the candidates perhaps should consider proposing.
Shout out to Whittier. Shout out to Eureka. Shout out to Shepard. I'm with you, my man. Fight the power. Damn the man. All right. Weird episode, but good episode. And we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
Take care.
Bill.